So historically, timberland has returned the same as the S&P 500 with half the volatility. And a lot of folks don't know that, but the institutions have known that. Big college endowments, large pension funds, they've been investing in timberland for a very long time.
Today in the Curious Builder podcast, we had John Brenard in from Atlanta, Georgia. He's with Southview Timberland Investments, and we had a great interview, really a different interview style. Mainly, we all buy lumber from somewhere, and hearing how it's grown, how it's a great investment, and how you can actually invest in property to basically de-risk your portfolio. If you want to know more, you're going to love this episode. Without further ado, here's John Brenard. Welcome to the Curious Builder podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Welcome back to another Monday episode. We've got John Brenard. And John, you're in Atlanta, Georgia. Is that right?
Atlanta, Georgia.
All right. We've got one of our collectives down there, Brad Robinson and Vincent Longo. So if you guys bump into each other, you have to say hi. You're with Southview Timberland Investments, and you're one of your teammates reached out to me, and because typically I'm having builders on, but what you do is very fascinating. Anyone who builds homes, which is most of our audience, either architects, designers, or builders, and we use lumber all the time. And so you and I were chatting just briefly. We'll kind of let you do a quick intro, but this episode is going to be a lot about like, how do trees, how are they an investment? How do they come to market is what I'm really interested in. They all show up at our lumber yards, Home Depots, all that. They show up in homes. I'd love to talk about from an economy standpoint, why the U.S. is maybe a unique position to sell lumber. You hear all the stuff in the news about Canada lumber and out west lumber. And so I'd love to dive into that. And then we're going to talk a little bit towards the middle end about raising a fund. I think whether you're building a spec home, a development, or in your case, you guys are doing a liquidity fund right now that we can talk a little bit about. So just prepping the audience for kind of where this conversation is going to go. Let's start at the beginning. You did not start in Southview Timberland Investments. You've got kind of a cool career, managing funds for very wealthy family offices. Let's start there. Let's go back to maybe more of your beginning and where you started and how you came into this.
Yeah, happy to, and happy to dive into all those things you just went over, and I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, so very quick background on me so we can really jump into those topics. My early career was in wealth management, working for the big wealth management firms that folks would recognize. Had a successful career doing that, started really right during the financial crisis. So kind of a tough time to start a business, but in all that chaos was actually a lot of opportunity. And so I built a good business over, about a decade, about 100 million in assets under management plus, great business, but, got to a point where, I was still very young for the industry and I just wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. And so left that business in 2017 to do a startup with some partners and some co-founders, built a company, sold it. And then where the timberland comes into all of this, not to jump too far ahead, is, my family bought some timberland in 2008. They live in Savannah, Georgia. And so that was my introduction to this industry, was in 2008 when my family bought some land and I took an interest to it. But we can dive more into that, but that's the high level.
No, I think that's super great. I guess I'll ask you two quick questions. What did you learn from your time managing 100 million under assets that you apply to your business today? And why, when you sold that company, what did you learn in getting a company ready to sell? So I guess two questions about your former career and how it helps you today.
Yeah, there are financial advisor groups that are managing billions of dollars. I had a successful business, with 100 million AUM as a solo advisor. That's a pretty good book of business for an individual advisor. And, the big thing is, maybe it's, very common answer is trust is so important in this business. You're managing people's money. If you don't know the answer to something, you got to go get the right answer for these folks. So, I carry that through into, what I'm doing today with Southview and raising our fund and building our business. But yeah, I know. And then transitioning into the startup, really moving into a completely different way of working, leaving a Fortune 500 company to a startup that we were building from the ground up is, you had to be a lot more resourceful on that entrepreneurship side. And, even though there was the uncertainty, you had to be more resourceful. I was more drawn to that. I think my personality likes to be creative. And so getting out of that box of that corporate world just suited me better. And that's what I continue to do today. So I guess to put a finer point on that is, there's two ways of working, right? You can work for the big companies or you can do things out on your own. Neither one of those are bad. It's just what suits your personality.
What was it? I think a lot of people often, I mean, if you are an entrepreneur, you think, man, how could you be anything but it? And if you haven't become one yet, I think you're probably left with two questions. One is, what do I have to do to become one because I'm interested in it? Or it, or you're basically like, what's preventing you from starting out? I've interviewed so many people. I'm always I admire people that become entrepreneurs later in life. I've had a number of people on that had families, young kids, and like they just packed up the truck and are just like, it's like going west and it's like 1876. You're like, dang, that takes some serious guts. Where I can only speak for myself. I mean, I was 21, 23. I mean, I knew nothing. My failure was moving home back, was moving back home, which isn't really that terrible of a failure, really.
Right.
But I guess my point is like, what has been your observations? Like, what drives you? You've seen, I assume, a fair number of people that have stayed in the corporate world. And to your point, if it fits your personality, it works out great. You can have a successful career in life in all manners. But what are some things that you've sort of noticed about people that have made this successful transition to entrepreneurship? Or kind of like, what are the benefits in your mind of like why you could never go back?
Yeah. So the stakes were high for me when I left my wealth management business when it comes to the financial side of it. At the time, I didn't have a family, right? So I didn't have that risk, but I was walking away from a very nice business that I'd built, a very nice income that I've, created for myself. And it didn't happen overnight, right? It was kind of a slow build up over, maybe 2 years where I started to think, I like what I'm doing, but I don't want to do this for the next 30 or 40 years of my career. And so I guess what I would just tell your listeners is if there's a way for you to maybe put one foot into the entrepreneurial world first before you jump into it, because that's what worked for me. I can only speak from my experiences. That startup that I joined, I had invested in that company. And then I left wealth management to run sales. I was an early employee at that company, but I wasn't the founder. And so I didn't take on the full risk of being a founder, but I got to experience that entrepreneurial life, right? I mean, I was early employee. We built that thing from the ground up. And that's what, allowed me to have the interest to continue doing that after. So if there's a way, if you're interested in becoming an entrepreneur, doing your own thing, maybe you find a way to enter that world without taking on the full risk to start. I know so many people are burn the boats, right? Leave it all behind you. There's no plan B. And that's all good. And I believe in that method too. But this is what worked for me is, I was able to transition into an entrepreneurial world without taking on the full risk, learned that I did like it and, continued down that path. And now I'm a founder of my own business.
No, I think that's helpful perspective. Let's go forward because I have a lot of questions around timberland. I mean, other than the obvious statement, when you say it, it's like it's land that has timber on it. But is there, I don't know much about the designation. Like, is there large swaths of property that are designated timberland? Walk us a little bit through like what that means. Or is it just simply buying large amounts of property that have timber on it? You said you invested in timberland back in 2008, I think was your family had some as well. But like, let's talk a little bit about the industry, mainly because we all buy lumber. Most of us don't know where it comes from, or we see, Sierra Pacific, or we see out west. But like, I would love to know a little bit about like the economics of the timber and lumber industry. And then really specifically, you mentioned how it's a phenomenal return. And I think a big part of what drew you to it was the fact that it's a great performer in terms of investment strategy. And I would love to hear a little bit what you mean by that.
Yeah. So just to take that first part, like what designates an area, like what would you call timberland? A lot of listeners may not know is the Southeast and specifically Georgia is one of the most productive timberland regions in the world. The Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington have a lot of timberland as well. There's parts of the Northeast and Midwest, but the Southeast, where we invest, is really one of the strongest regions. And yes, I mean, these are very rural parts of our country, but outside of these cities like Atlanta or Savannah, Jacksonville, Charleston, it doesn't take very long for it to get pretty rural where you can find these timberland properties. And what they are is they're professionally managed, professionally planted, large acreage where we're growing primarily southern yellow pine. And there's three species. There's slash, loblolly, and longleaf. Those are the three dominant species that we grow. And you'll see, I mean, they are professionally planted timber plantations, and they're managed by, forestry, people with forestry backgrounds. People go to school for many years to learn how to manage these properties. And so that's what really designates them is they're typically professionally planted, professionally managed. It's not some random forest. These are very serious operations that are meant to be as productive as possible to grow this timber.
So I have a lot of questions. Okay, so the first one is, what is what would be the average size of these farms be? Are we talking 50 acres, 100 acres, thousands acres, millions of acres? Like what? Give me some size parameters here of what these timberland sections would be.
Yeah, so with our business, Southview, we buy tracts of timberland of, we call them mid-size assets, small to mid-size assets, couple hundred acres up to maybe 2,500 acres. So still, I mean, these are very large tracts of land, but compared to what the big institutions are buying, they're buying 10,000 acres at a time. They're raising hundreds of millions of dollars of capital to deploy into this asset. And so they don't get out of bed for an asset unless it's 10,000 acres or more. And so some of the biggest timberland owners, timberland managers in this country are some of the biggest landowners in the country. I mean, they manage hundreds of thousands, and in some cases millions of acres across the country. So very large tracts of land. Yes.
And is this designated? Who designates it? Like if you just bought all this, like Ted Turner, I heard at one point had more land than maybe any natural private citizen, and he's passed now. But actually, he's from Atlanta, right?
Yes.
Isn't Ted Turner? So like,
he is. Oh yeah.
Maybe it's a good example. But I guess my point is like, can you just buy land and then designate it timberland, assuming it has trees on it, or maybe not? I mean, like, or does it have to be registered? Because where I'm going to go with this question is private versus obviously public land. So like,
Sure.
I mentioned before we came on, my sister used to work for the Bureau of Land Management, and she would do timber sales out west. So like, of the forestry, one of my next questions will be like, how much of it is private industry versus private industry harvesting trees on public lands that are owned by the Department of Interior? Just trying to understand like the global scope of how big this industry is.
Yeah, so I could really speak to the Southeast best where we invest. 90% of the land in the Southeast is privately owned. So owned by individuals like you and me. And so that's why we like to invest here, is because there's really that freedom to operate versus, the West Coast, where you're right. I mean, there's more government land, more federally owned land. It's just kind of a different game. Whereas in the Southeast, it's mostly privately owned, upwards of 90%. And so, there's not necessarily like some stamp or designation that calls it timberland, but what you typically look for is there has to be markets. There has to be somewhere for you to sell that timber once you harvest. You're selling it to these various sawmills that create different types of products, and they usually have to be pretty close to your property, 50 to 100 acres. Otherwise, you can't move it there efficiently because of where fuel costs are. So,
I'm sorry, did you mean to say 50 to 100 miles?
Excuse me, 50 to 100 miles. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't know if you'd been in the tree game so long that you designated distance with acreage.
Yeah, I meant to say miles. Yes. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah. But that's how you can tell that you're in, a strong market is, there's, there's a good mill infrastructure, right? When we buy properties in Georgia's the number one forestry state. There's typically, 6 to 8 different sawmills that produce different types of products depending on what size timber we're harvesting. And that's a good place to invest, because that means you can be harvesting different products at different times, right? You have diversification versus if you're buying a property that only is relying on only one mill, there's some risks there because that mill can close down and then you lose that market.
I mean, it sounds obvious. It's like if have you ever played Settlers of Catan?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I haven't played,
So,
but
but I mean, it's
yeah.
like, you need the roads, then you need the
Hmm.
ore, and like your city builds differently. I mean, most small builders, I should just speak for myself. Like, I'm not thinking about distribution because I'm thinking about my local market. I'm building small, high-end custom homes, but like, we actually are way more global than we all think. And we just did this really cool home here in Minneapolis called Misahus, which is Scandinavian for cozy home. And we have 22 countries represented with 35 brand partners. So, but we made a deliberate choice to try to go international just to make it different. But
Hmm.
like, it's really interesting when you start engaging with companies in Sweden or Germany or France, or you really start thinking about shipping totally different. And I did it
Sure.
from a marketing standpoint and an interest standpoint, but from you, you're also looking at it from a profitability standpoint. Like, the closer I would imagine your timberland is to a mill, you're cutting down. I mean, it's just logical, right? I think you, like in Minnesota, we have a lot of the top window companies in the country up here. And the way I understand it is, back in the early 1900s, we had a lot of wood, we had a lot of water, and it was very easy to make, a lot of windows up here. And so like then these manufacturers start building up their glass companies. And so I get like infrastructure, which is actually, I think, kind of interesting. It's just building the machine that builds the machine. My question is probably should have been asked earlier. Is the Southeast such a great region just because of your climate, because it grows fast, you have a longer season? Like, what makes the Southeast such a great timber location?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, our climate is one of the best for growing, this species. It's a very moderate climate, warm climate. We get lot of moisture, and the genetics of these trees we're growing are getting better and better. And so there's also a bit, pretty big emphasis in the school system around here and the universities for forestry. There's just a lot of very talented individuals that know how to manage these forests very well. A lot of government support for the industry as well, especially here in Georgia, but also Alabama and in South Carolina, but really here in Georgia. So there's just a lot of support for this industry. A lot of people employed by it.
And is it because like we've been working with Pella, they're one of the sponsors of this podcast as well. I've been working with them for 22 years, and I know because I've done a number of ad reads for them, it's always Southern Yellow Pine. Why is it? Because Southern Yellow Pine is just so readily available? Is it because it's a great wood, it's stable? Like, what made Southern Yellow Pine such an attract? Because you do three versions of it. What is it about Southern Yellow Pine that is so attractive to the lumber industry?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have the exact history of why Southern yellow pine, but that is the dominant species that we grow here, and it's what has been the emphasis of what we've been planning for decades, and what all the big timberland managers have put a lot of research behind to develop to have the best stands, have the most productive plantations that they can. So it's just where the energy has gone, what the industry has focused on. So that's what we use here. And depending on what is going on any particular site is what species they plant, whether it's the slash, longleaf, or loblolly.
And give me a context of like the size of these trees and the growing cycle. You have this, let's say a 2,000 acre piece. I don't know if they're growing all at the same time. Are there different sections? Like, how do you'd think like, the Lorax, right? It's like, you cut the tree down. If you don't have, I assume that's where it comes into forestry and having sustainable practices, but
Sure.
educate us a little bit about like, how does one go about, it's not like corn. I'm in
Sure.
Minnesota.
Every year.
We're
Right.
corn country, right? I mean,
Right.
we used to have this thing. It's a chest high by 4th of July. It was kind of like, you had a good season. It's like there's corn everywhere here, but it's a seasonal thing. It's much shorter. Like your cycles are way longer. How do you market that? How do you make sure financially you're stable? Like, how does one
Right.
manage that from a financial side as the business?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, the large dimensional saw timber that we get 2x4s and 2x6s from, 2x10s, all that. I mean, that's 20 years, right? So, it's 20 years to get that product. The good news is though, is that we've been growing, timber in this region for a very long time. And so you can go out and buy a tract of land that has 5-year-old timber on it, some 10-year-old timber on it, and maybe some 20-year-old. So you have diverse age classes to start with. You're not starting at zero. So that's what we do in our fund is we're buying properties that have diverse age classes. And you talk about, how it's managed is, those different ages are different product types, right? So the smaller dimensional timber is for pulp and paper, and the larger dimensional timber is for the building products, what you would use to frame homes with, or for the repair and remodel market. It's we're not starting from zero in many cases, but yeah, it's 15 plus years before you start stepping up into a product that has some type of income from it.
And I would imagine it probably, that's pretty capital intensive, right? I mean, if you have to buy something and wait 15 years for it, like, dang.
There's some upfront costs, but the ongoing expense is fairly low. So there's some site prep costs that go into it when you're just starting out. But the long-term management, there is some that you have to put into it, but I mean, it's nothing like owning a
rental.
A rental. Yeah, I mean, not even close. Like a multifamily, where tenant turnover and all that.
Yeah. I can see the appeal to it. This episode is brought to you by Pella Windows and Doors. I've used Pella for 21 years as the exclusive window company on every one of my builds. When people ask me who I trust for windows and doors, it's Pella, every time. Their craftsmanship, their innovation, the top-tier service make them a no-brainer for any custom home builder or designer who demand the best. Whether you're designing something bold or building something with timeless elegance, Pella has you covered. They're also the only window company that has a lifetime warranty on all of their windows. I've gotten to know all of their people at Pella Corporate, as well as locally here at Pella Northland. I'm proud to call them our partners and our friends. Visit Pella.com to learn more and connect with your local reps today. Also, for more information, you can listen to episode 1, where I interview their founders, as well as episode 109, where we talk about the innovation at Pella. Reminds me a little bit of a mutual fund. You're diversifying risk. I mean, if you're getting a 5-year, a 10-year, a 15, a 20-year, I mean, you kind of are building sort of your portfolio is different forests that sort of represent different harvest deals. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. We're also diversifying across counties as well. And so we buy those small to mid-sized tracts. We can buy in many different counties across Georgia. And what that does is that allows us to tap into the different timber markets, because some of these markets are hyper local. Some of these sawmills make specific products. We have certain relationships with them. And so we can also diversify by location. So yeah, that's the beauty of a fund structure versus putting all of your capital into, just one tract of land, because there's a lot of risk with that, right? You have, natural disasters. You may have a mill or two shut down, right? You may have some type of, just some type of problem with that particular, individual tract versus that fund approach, like you mentioned, more of a diversified mutual fund approach, like what we do with our fund.
So let's talk a little bit about how, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there is a consensus that we don't do, like, especially up in Minnesota, we're on the Canadian border, right? Like, I always feel like, at least up here, and I don't know this to be a fact, I'm just going off of, this is 22 years of stereotypes. Like, our lumber comes from Canada. Our lumber comes from out west. You always hear about, like, lumber prices surging. Like, I got to believe we're probably better at producing wood than we are, the layman probably is aware of. Where does the U.S. compare to other countries in the world in terms of, like, forestry and lumber procurement? I have to imagine we also probably build more than anybody else, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we build homes at scale, at speed, faster than anyone else in the country or in the world. Right. Sorry. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, on average, we build about 1.25 to 1.5 million homes in this country every year on average. So, and that's typically built with, stick built with what we grow in the South and what's grown in the Pacific Northwest. But there is still, lumber that comes over the Canadian border. I think last time I was looking at it, it's about 20%, 20+% that comes over the Canadian border. And so yeah, we are still importing them. The current administration is doing things to kind of make it more favorable to work here in the U.S. with U.S. producers. So, and those tariffs are benefiting our industry. But you said it. We're at the top of the list in terms of having some of the best practices, the best producers, of timber anywhere in the world. So I would put us, especially here in Georgia, I would put that up against anywhere else in the world.
Interesting. Nick Schiffer is a friend of mine. He's up in Boston, and he went over to, I think, Germany or France, and they were single sourcing all of the wood that went into his house from a single forest.
Wow.
And but they had every single tree which was registered down to the board, which I thought was amazing. Like, do we do that level of, like, what is our process for documenting, where lumber comes from and like how it's harvested and things like that?
Yeah, that sounds very European. That high regulation and all of that. Yeah, I mean, there are certifications you can have on your timberland properties. Yeah, I mean that can be documented here in the U.S., but not. I mean that's another level. I want to go back to what you just mentioned, what we spoke about a moment ago with Canadian producers, and there's actually 50% of the sawmills here in the Southeast are now owned by Canadian companies. So
Really?
so they have actually left Canada to come to the Southeast to open their operations here because of how productive our forests are. The Canadians have a lot of crown lands, so it's owned by the government. And so there's more restrictions, right? There's just more scrutiny, more regulations. Here in the U.S. and specifically the Southeast, we just have the freedom to operate, and so you have a lot of businesses coming here because if they're going to invest $100 million in a sawmill, they want to know that they're not going to be regulated out, and they just don't have that risk here.
I mean, that actually brings up, I mean, everywhere in the country, I don't know what your papers are saying down there, but the boundary waters where I love to go, it's a large tract of land between Canada and the US filled with lakes, and I love it there. But, we've had a lot of fires up there, and obviously the press is getting all over. The last couple of years, we've had a lot of fires and smoke, and I think we're going to see more and more of it with global warming, obviously, and I should just say climate change is dramatic. Lots of fires out west. In fact, I had a race last year that got canceled at mile 66 of the race because the wildfires in the Three Sisters went from 800 acres to 18,000 acres. And
Wow.
so, like, how does forestry work with fires? And like, if you have a natural disaster like a windstorm or a hurricane, can you go in and salvage? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you have to do it pretty quickly, because if the down trees stay down for too long, they rot. Or walk the audience a little bit through, because I think there's this common perception that we have lots of trees, and that's true. But like, if you don't help pop some of these stereotypes of like, do you leave timber alone? If you harvest it, you actually have less fires. I mean, there's a lot of things about how we take down trees that would actually help a lot of these situations, if I had to guess.
Yeah. It's a pushback that we get in our business is, oh, you're harvesting this timber that's bad for the environment, right? Well, what we're doing with where we have designated in the country that this is where we're going to be growing timber is we're actually protecting all of these other parts of the country where we're not harvesting timber, right? We've designated these zones. This is where, because this economy wouldn't survive if we didn't have this product. And so we have to do this somewhere. And so if you think about it, because we've designated, these areas in our country, to this industry, it's protecting the other areas. So there's that point. But you're right. When there are these natural disasters that come through, we just had Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton that came through in the last 2 years. That put down a fair amount of timber in our region. Our industry really, jumped on that, and we got a lot of that timber up off the ground to avoid having the bug infestations. A lot of people pulled together to to support each other. So that's important. Is you have to jump on these things. When these disasters happen, we have very good forestry practices, good forestry management. Right, we're keeping the understory maintained. That's a big part of it, because that understory is what can get dry and create these forest fires. So having good forest management and allowing the folks who know how to do this to do their job is what's going to prevent a lot of these natural disasters from happening. And you mentioned on, when is the right time to harvest? Sometimes, these trees get to a point, they've reached that maximum age, that maximum productivity. So they need to be harvested so new trees can be planted, because those new trees actually start to sequester more carbon. They're kind of like teenagers, right? They eat a lot of they eat a lot of food, right? They sequester more carbon when they're growing, and you can harvest those old trees, which is going to store that carbon. That's what you're looking at when you're looking at wood, is stored carbon. And so it's a very good thing for the environment, is to be harvesting the old trees and planting new ones. It's actually good for the environment.
I've heard that. I was going to actually bring that up. You went right into it. So
Yeah.
kudos to you. It's not the first time you've had this conversation, obviously. What yeah, I mean, some of it just makes common sense. People get so worked up about this, that, or another thing, but some of it is just, I think if you just explain to it, how it works, it just makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about, well, I guess the one last question. So I live in a 1919 house. I mean, I build new homes, I remodel, and you always hear this thing about from craftsmen. And we're not going to talk about the breathability of old homes because that's more of a systems approach. But like the old wood that you have in 100-year-old
Yeah.
homes, like, that old world growth. I mean, it's denser
Yes.
rings. There's no, correct me if I'm wrong, but there doesn't seem to be any question that like a 2x6 from 1900 is way stronger than a 2x6 from 2026. Is that accurate or not?
That
Or is
that
that
is accurate.
subjective?
Yeah, that is accurate. The material that we are growing, southern yellow pine, I mean, is still a very strong material, and it's far exceeds whatever regulations are required for building codes. And it's safe and strong. But you're right, it's not old growth, right? We have different needs. We have a larger population to serve these days, and so we need these genetics to be growing faster to support this
Well, and
population, to support the economy.
perfect. So, I mean, I have no issue with that. I mean, I support that because I'm a builder and I need
Yeah.
it. My question was more of like, what advantages does an old growth forest have? Because let's say it takes 20, 30 years and it reaches its called adulthood, and anything after that is sort of, I'm guessing, law of diminishing returns. Like if a tree is 100 years old, does it make it, is the trees, let's say, are already at 90% and you're just looking for those last couple percent? And I'm guessing I'm mixing analogies here a little bit, but I'm guessing different species of wood probably have different
Yeah.
properties the older they get, would be my guess. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, like with southern yellow pine, 25, 30 years, you should be looking to harvest that, because yeah, it's diminishing returns at that point. And also, you're really running a risk too. We saw with these hurricanes that came through with Hurricane Helene and Milton, the guys who were really trying to push it, a lot of their timber got taken down because it was, older growth, right? It was just heavier. And some of the guys who were more active with their plantations, more active management, they fared a lot better than the guys who were really trying to push it with this older growth timber.
Where I'm going with this is like, I mean, maybe I don't even know. I always hear my old craftsmen. Well, oh man, they don't build them like they used to. Oh,
Sure.
this timber, man, I sure haven't seen one of these in a while. I mean, it's just like, but maybe
Right.
that's when you get old. You say that about everything that was
I think that's
from
true.
I don't
Yes.
know. And so, yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I'm open to any sort of like
Yes.
observations you would have on that. But it's, I've often pointed out because like we do a lot of oak up here, in particular wood
Yeah.
floors and cabinetry and things like that. And like, is the ring density, like how close they are together, is that an indicator of how old it is? So like if my rings are closer together, or like even on plain sawn, if my grains are tighter, is that usually an indicator that it's older, or not necessarily?
That's my understanding. Yes, I mean, is counting the rings is, that's how you get the age. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can also see the rate of the growth too. Some of this newer species of southern yellow pine, the rings are further apart because they're growing faster. And I'm not going to hold myself out as an expert in the genetics of the trees and so forth, but that is my understanding of how
Okay.
that works. Yes.
Well, I'm sure people are like, when are you going to stop talking about wood, Mark? I want to hear about finances. Well, you
Sure.
tuned into the right time at 34:48. Here we go. Let's talk about why, when you were at JP Morgan, or why, when you were investing, like, why is investing in timberland a good return? Like, why does nobody know about it? Like, I certainly have never had my financial planners be like, oh, by the way, we're going to do the S&P 500 and we're going to do some timberland.
Sure.
Talk to us a little bit about why is it a good investment, whatever sort of financial data you can get around it. And then we'll talk maybe after this a little bit about like starting a fund, because you've got one going on right now. And I think it's going to be very relevant to the audience.
Yeah, so historically, timberland has returned the same as the S&P 500 with half the volatility. And a lot of folks don't know that, but the institutions have known that. The big endowments, the big college endowments, large pension funds, they've been investing in timberland for a very long time. And that's, usually what those groups have had exposure to timberland for decades. So it's really been for reserved for those types of groups as part of a very large multi-billion dollar portfolio. Is they're going to have percent timberland, as part of that allocation, as to help with volatility, to be an inflation hedge. But there's really this whole other world which we play in with these smaller size assets, which still gets you those same types of returns or better, but you're getting direct exposure like through our fund. And so the returns are many, can be come from different places with the approach that we use. It's not just the timber. So we're buying tracts of land outside of these growing Southeast metros, a couple hundred acres up to maybe 2,000 acres. And what's happening is population is moving here, capital is moving here, businesses are moving here. And so there's more demand for that land. And so we'll buy 1,000 acres and we may sell 300 acres to a home builder or a recreational buyer and keep the other 700 acres for the long-term timber returns, but get that enhanced return from selling that land at a premium.
Well,
So
I would imagine you could also cover your downstroke. If you had to spend, yeah, I just keep the number simple. If you had to buy it for 100 million and you could sell 30% of it for 30 million, I mean, you've just decreased your downstroke because you might have to wait 10 or 15 years to get your full return, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we always look when we're buying a tract of land, we want to have some type of quicker exit. That's the strategy that's worked for us. Is we don't have, a lot of these bigger institutional funds, they have a 10-year time horizon. Our fund is a 5-year fund. So we're always looking for a very quick exit within the first year by typically selling land, selling some, parceling out and selling some portion of that land, maybe retaining some portion of it for the long-term timber returns, maybe have a recreational lease on it. There might be some farmland on it that we can lease out for income as well. And so it's not just waiting 20 years for one timber harvest. We try to be a lot more opportunistic. And that's what we did personally with our own money. We invested that way in friends and family deals. That's what my business partner built his wealth with, that strategy. And that's the approach that we're offering in our fund today.
So you have a fund you're actively looking for funds now.
Yeah, so right now we're raising a fund for this strategy that I'm talking about. We have some family offices that are investing with us, some high net worth accredited investors, and some registered investment advisory groups. They really see us as a way to truly diversify their portfolio because we're uncorrelated from the stock market, very far removed from Wall Street, with this approach. And so, yeah, we're looking for more partners, and if this is appealing to anybody, we're happy to talk more about it.
I mean, high level, just because I find it really interesting. The reason I think it's relevant is I've had a lot of people recently, the last couple of years, myself included, on a much smaller level. I mean, partnerships. I mean, really, a fund is just a partnership.
That's right.
And I think most builders out there that have done any sort of spec or buying land, have talked to a bank about, hey, I'm going to go into a development. There's 20 lots. There's 5 builders. Everyone gets 4, that kind of thing. You take them down. I mean, most builders in the country are familiar with that kind. Or you're doing a spec home. You're doing a single partnership. That's just another version of a fund. It's just you're doing it with the bank. I think some of now, because the network, and I think social media has a big part to play with this. Podcasting obviously does. I mean, I think everyone's network is so much bigger than it was 5-10 years ago. I mean, obviously I'm biased because I interview 104 guests across the country. But I mean, I got so many relationships around the country that if I wanted to start a fund for whatever reason, I mean, I would just talk to guests that I've had on the show. I could probably, I don't know what I'm going to use the fund for, but the point is, I think people have more of an appetite now to sort of, not dabble's the wrong word because that makes it sound too casual, but like you mentioned trust. One of the first things you said that you learned at JP Morgan was trust. I think these funds come down to trust because I don't think they just take anyone. I do a few partnership deals, for sponsorship, and we've gone in a few Series A, few Series B in terms of investment in exchange of services. And so, but like at the end of the day, like I'm only going to do that with someone that I believe in and that I trust in. And I think most funds come, I mean, you need money, you need liquidity, but correct me if I'm wrong. You also kind of want people that are going to support what you're doing too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, this fund is a 5-year fund. So we're going to be working with these people for, you know, a good amount of time. And, you know, the way we see it is we're bringing a lot of value with our knowledge, right? The deal flow that we're able to find, how long we've been operating in this region, 30 plus years. And so, there needs to be, that mutual, it's not just about the capital. It's not just about the money. It needs to be about the relationship, and it needs to have, some type of value add besides just capital.
Mm-hmm. What, I mean, a lot of times funds have like minimums, like 50, 100.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have a minimum in your fund?
Yeah, it's $100,000 minimum.
Okay. What, out of curiosity, I guess I've never thought to ask this before when people tell me what their minimums. What is the point of having minimums? Is it just like, man, if you had 100 people doing 10 grand, it just becomes a lot of paperwork? I mean, is that really what it comes down to?
Yeah, I mean, if it was 10 grand and we had all these investors, we have a fund administrator who is able to handle that. I mean, they're capable of doing that work. But yeah, I mean, it's being able to have relationships with each of the investors. Most of our investors are here in the Southeast, so they get what we do. And for the first time, they're saying, wow, I have the ability to invest in these types of properties that I've been driving through my whole life. You guys have a way for me to access this investment. So yeah, I mean, it's it's the buy-in, right? I mean, it sets a level of commitment, and everybody has to be accredited. So you have to have a certain level of liquidity to come into the fund. And
I mean, why would that be?
Yeah, so our type of offering is called a Regulation D 506C offering. And what that means is we can only work with accredited investors, basically people who are more, understanding that that there's risk with this. This is a private fund, that either they have certain net worth or they have certain income, and that puts them into that accredited investor
basically
status.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in plain English, if this fund went under, they would still be fined. Is that essentially what a credit is, that you can withstand an issue? Because if you also have to do a capital raise, you want your partners to also be able to be like, hey, let's invest more money into this. Is that some version of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair way to put it. Yes.
The reason I asked, correct me if I'm wrong, but you and I were chatting beforehand. We were talking about the different books for this year, but Q2 was Psychology of Money, and Warren Buffett, no surprise, has one of the greatest quotes. I keep saying it because I just love it so much. He said, "People are idiots." He says they invest money they can't afford to lose in things they don't believe in. That's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
He goes,
Yes.
they should invest money in things they do believe in with money they can afford to lose. And
Right.
it's funny how just a simple saying, it's so profound. Like, I don't know how anyone could disagree with that statement that was just shared. And yet it's not like it's rocket science. It's honestly 2 + 2. And yet how many of us, have either, I don't like the word bet, have invested on things that we don't know much about, or at the end of the day, it goes back to your earlier comment. Do I trust these people that are investing the money, and do I believe in what they're doing?
Right.
And I think if you can do those things and you have the money, it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, it's so true. And the reason I'm drawn to this asset class personally is, in the way that we invest is we don't use any debt. So all of the capital goes into the land. And so, this is not, some digital currency, this is not ones and zeros on a screen. I mean, this is a tangible asset. And so
I like that.
That's why I'm drawn to it. And, we welcome all of our LPs, all of our partners, they can come see us. Like if they want to come and visit the properties that, that we've invested in, we're happy to take them out and show them these assets. We've done that many times, with our partners. And that's just hard to do with other types of asset classes. And, I think our assets, I would argue, are some of the more beautiful assets as well. I mean, these are still beautiful rural parts of our country, big, open blue skies and beautiful timber properties. So anybody who invests, they're welcome to come see us. We love them.
If you're looking to level up your business in 2026 and beyond, the Contractor Coalition Summit is the place for you. If you've been a listener to the show, you know that this has been the single biggest factor in how I've leveled up over the last couple of years. It's had a huge, profound impact on my business, my personal life. It's what helped me launch the Curious Builder, in fact. And then our last one of the season will be another 3-4 day event in Charlotte, North Carolina. All the details can be found at contractorcoalitionsummit.com. It wasn't until you just said it that I realized, like, it's kind of like, it's actually just, you have an investment that has an investment on it. The land is still the most valuable part, because without the land, you can't grow the trees, but you've got trees on the land. So it's like kind of like a 2-for-1.
Yes. There's an expression, timberland is, it's a factory and it's a warehouse. It has the land, right? But it has this factory, which is growing the timber constantly as we're sitting here talking, but it's also storing it, right? It's storing it, right there on the land. I was just very drawn to it when I found this many years ago. Just the level of control that you have with this type of investment. You don't have tenants and toilets. I know that's somewhat of a cliche thing to say in real estate investing, but it is true. I mean, there's not a lot of things that can make it go sideways unless you just drastically overpay, and that's why I'm very drawn to it.
How many, like, I know home builders, I think I heard a stat the other day that there's 800,000 contractors in America. Now that would just be anyone who puts on a tool belt all the way up to builders. So I don't know how many, let's say, custom home builders. I should probably get those numbers. It'd be interesting to talk about. Or I'm trying to frame up this conversation is like, everyone knows a remodeler or a handyman or a builder. Sure. You are now my first official person I know who does timberland management. So my point is, how many are there? It takes a lot of money, I assume, to buy, which, it would drastically reduce the people that can do it. But like, how common of a thing, like your competition, you have the big guys that are, you said they're not getting out of bed unless they're doing 10,000 acre deals. And you live in that middle ground where you're trying to find value. When there's a forest that comes up for sale, how many people are looking at it?
Yeah, so with the big packages, it's just a small group of institutions typically that can afford to buy that.
Give me an example. Who would an institution be?
I mean, there's a handful of them. I mean, Manulife is a big one. Nuveen is a big one. TIAA.
Okay, so no names that are registering a bell. I'm just curious, like if it was like a household name that got into it that I didn't know. Okay, so these are all.
Yeah, insurance companies, these are $1 billion groups that have timberland groups. Now with what we're buying and selling, I mean, there can be local competition, of course. I mean, the adjacent landowner maybe wants to expand his land, so he's going to have an interest in that. But what so often happens, with the size tracts that we're buying is because we've been in this region a long time, we have a very big network, is you have the situation, for example, where it's a third or fourth generation who's owned this land. There's an estate, right? There's 3 or 4 children who have inherited this land, adult children. They all live across the country, and they just want to be out of the land. They all want to get their cash, and that's where a group like ours steps in and makes it very easy for them. We have the cash already raised in our fund, and we can say, hey, we can close quickly.
I just had an idea. I was trying to make this land deal be like a 3-way win. So you own the land, okay. So you got the warehouse, you got the factory. Right now I love wellness. It's a $1.9 trillion industry that's doubling in the next 9 years. It's monstrous. And there's a cool place down, I think in Tennessee called Blackberry Farms or something like that. It's super cool. Could you find, I mean, you've got some beautiful country down there in Atlanta with the land. I mean, could you, let's say you have a 2,000, 5,000, whatever acreage for the, could you designate a part of it, have like VRBOs or like a not recreational, you already talked a little bit about what that might be, but like, could you have like sort of almost like a hospitality off the grid, like separate business that's surrounded by all these beautiful woods, but it's also like a work. Now, I don't know what the time horizon would that be on, because it's like, if you have this beautiful lodge that looks across a lake and has all these trees, and then all the trees go bye-bye, that lodge, might see a decline in reservations. I'm just curious if like that's an actual thing that you guys talk about as terms of a business model, because it seems like with the amount of land you're procuring, it seems like that might actually be, because not all of the land is going to be 100% perfect for tree growth. And so like that portion could obviously be used for housing in this case, or lodging for like a hotel or some sort of hospitality off the grid wellness thing is of course what I'm attracted to.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing that a little bit closer into Atlanta. You're seeing, developments like that pop up, kind of like farm to table living. I
Yes,
mean, they're
exactly.
yeah, so you're seeing that, a little bit closer into Atlanta. We're a little bit further out. It's typically more rural, an hour, 2 hours outside of Atlanta. And there's huge demand for, we mentioned it, but that recreational land, somebody who's looking for 100 acres or 300 acres with a single family home on it. And they're willing to pay a premium because they want a way to get out of Atlanta, a way to get out of Savannah, for the weekend or for 3 or 4 days during hunting season, throughout hunting season. And that's a huge market that continues to grow, is these urban escapes. And we're really benefiting from that because we buy 1,000 acres and we can parcel off a couple hundred acres to that buyer. But you're right. I mean, there's many different ways that you can use the land, and you're seeing some groups getting very creative, especially in that wellness space. You're seeing it.
Mm-hmm. What excites you? I mean, what are you kind of excited about here for the rest of this year and into next? I mean, as maybe switching it now to like either business operations or personal, or I think as every entrepreneur kind of has to have either an internal drum. I mean, we've talked a lot about the business,
Yeah.
but why do you love it? Why do you like to do it? What are you excited about? What's kind of up and coming? I mean, right now, I imagine most of your your business is recruiting around this fund, but let's put that on we just talked about that long enough. What are other things that you're just interested in?
Yeah, I mean, just talk, in terms of what I'm excited about is, just how far we've come with this business. I mean, if I could, myself from, 2 years ago could see where we are today with this business and kind of reminding yourself. I think that's important for entrepreneurs to do, because some days when you're in the grind and like you're in the doldrums of, raising capital and, finding the deals and doing the things for the business, you got to remind yourself that like, yourself from a year or two ago would kill to be where you are today. That, reminding myself of that gets me excited. And we're buying some really good assets. My guys are fired up. They, I'm very close to them. I'm in Atlanta, but they live in South Georgia, so I see them all the time. They're finding some great deals, so they're excited finding the assets. I raise a lot of the capital, and they find the deals, so we're working really well together. And I just really feel like I've found something that I'm passionate about and looking forward to doing for the rest of my career. So, yeah, this is my focus. I have other hobbies outside of this, but this is my main priority. I love it right now.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this next question, because it's probably my favorite question. Is, on Thursdays we have a series called Losers or Winners, where we have business owners just say like the biggest loss that they've had, because we learn so much from our scars. I'm curious, like, is there a business deal that comes to mind, something you've bought or a piece of land that turned out to be just like a toxic waste pit, or the government said, nope, you can't do anything with this? Or like, what do you have any like what is one of the more painful lessons you've had in your career? And it could even be back at JP Morgan or wherever you were.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's listening to this call who raises capital for projects, I mean, I lose all the time. I mean, it's, you're having good conversations with investors. You think it's going somewhere, right? And then, and then they disappear, or you think they're about to move forward and something changes. So there's just so much loss all the time, so much rejection in this business. But what keeps us going is those wins. We get them from time to time, and if we all want to eat, somebody's got to sell. So that's kind of that's a mantra from somebody else. But I like the fight. Like I like being in it, and I don't want to do, back office operations. I want to be having conversations with smart people, right? I want to be negotiating. I want to be selling, because once I start doing all the, the paperwork and things like that, it just reminds me how much I love what I do, which is getting in front of people and selling what we do. So
right.
It's hard to pinpoint one thing, but
no, that's fair. I love that the one thing was like every day. It's like, it's funny because right now we're dealing with a lot of I feel like right now, well, here's my next question rather than going into my failures. What is What's your general sense of the market right now? You're selling to lumber mills. Lumber mills are not idiots. They're looking at futures and housing markets and permits being pulled and interest rates. What are you guys seeing in the numbers? Because like a small custom home builder, and even when the majority of the people that listen, like, we're 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years out. Most of the people listening are not thinking 3, 5. We're point and shoot. We're looking at the
Yeah.
right here and now. But you're buying forests that they're going to mature for 20 years.
Yeah.
I sort of like that diversification, honestly, because you're like, it's a good year, it's a bad year. I like you had this great thing, like, I just wait one more year and the tree's worth more money. So it's like, I kind of like
Right.
your business model. Honestly, I can see why it's attractive to firms for a hedge against inflation. But what are you seeing in the numbers right now?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, our timberland grows 5 tons per acre per year, right? So if we're not having a good timber market, we sit still, and that product is going to become more valuable year after year. So and we pay very close attention, to what the timber markets are doing. Saw timber is still good. I mean, you can get good prices for saw timber right now on a case by case basis. A lot of this business in terms of getting good prices for your timber is hyper local, depending on what that local mill needs. And so having those relationships with the loggers, with those sawmills is important. Now, pulp and paper markets, those have softened quite a bit. We've had a couple, large pulp and paper mills close down. But what's interesting is the state, especially Georgia, is putting a lot of money behind new outlets for smaller diameter timber for things like biochar, bioenergy, sustainable aviation fuel. There's all these new industries that are popping up to use this product, which is very exciting. Something that would apply to you too is, and they've been using it in Europe for a long time, is mass timber. And I don't know if you've been looking at mass timber, but it's a process, basically of like cross laminating, the timber to create very, very strong material that rivals, steel and concrete to build mid-rise buildings. Like they just built a mid-rise size building here in Ponce City Market in Atlanta, all built with southern yellow pine sourced here in Georgia with mass timber. So there's a lot of exciting things that are happening. So, I'm bullish long term on what we do, especially with the land markets too, because the land that we're buying underneath, all this timber, it continues to become more and more valuable here in the Southeast.
Yeah, 100%. I think I haven't done a lot of stuff with mass timber, but I am starting to do quite a bit. Probably every other project has some form of thermally modified wood. And so I don't know, that would be something I would imagine you sell to a mill and then they sell to a processing plant or something like that. You guys don't get any direct thermally modified wood contracts, do you?
You would have to educate me more on the
Well, thermally
definition of that.
modified is it was, from my understanding, it was done over in the Nordic countries. There's a local company here, Arborwood, up in Minnesota. I think they have a factory down somewhere in the South, like, I don't know where, Kentucky, Louisiana, Indiana, somewhere in the mid down there. But anyway, south of me anyway. I know I just named 3 states, so I'm aware of my geography.
Yes.
And I know it's not Atlanta. But my point being is that they run the wood through a heat process that actually changes the molecular structure of the wood, makes it stronger. Shishugibon has been a very popular treatment on wood for more of the aesthetics. It's a charred flame on it, but I love the old aspects of it. I look back at like feudal Japan, and I guess the samurai warriors, if you will, would have the shishugibon burned on the siding, but it's rot resistant. It's already been burned, so it can't burn again. So if enemy combatants were shooting flaming arrows at your buildings back 500 years ago, like the building wouldn't burn as quickly because it had already been burned. It's termite resistant. There's all kinds of treatments that can be done to the wood when it's thermally modified. The only reason I thought of it was you just mentioned biofuels and all these different things that are coming out of wood. And a lot of them are old practices, just coming up with new ways to apply them to our industry. And I'm in this industry. I love it. I'll be here for as long as I've got energy and health and my kids are young. What else am I going to do? So it's like, I do love seeing the innovation around, housing and building, and obviously interviewing people like you and hearing about your business.
Yeah, look up mass timber. I mean, that is, really a growing industry, and there's a lot of money being put behind it. But long term bullish on what we're doing. I mean, it's always there's always different dynamics with any market, but yeah, long term bullish on what we're doing.
Well, I love it. We're on the hour, so I want to respect your time and the audiences as well. We'll have everything in the show notes. And thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate you and your team reaching out, and it was a pleasure to meet you.
Mark, thank you very much. And just easy way to find us if you're interested in learning more is southviewtimber.com. We have a contact us page if you want to reach out to us there. So thanks so much, Mark. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for tuning in to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like this episode, do us a favor, share it with 3 other business owners. The best way that we can spread what we're doing is by word of mouth, and with your help, we can continue to help other curious builders expand their business. Please share it with your friends, like and review online, and thanks again for tuning in.